I don't even know how old I am anymore. I lost count a long time ago. All I know is I've lived long enough to watch my heart break more than once and still keep beating. The days are quieter now, but inside me, the noise of memory never stops. So much has passed. So many people have come and gone. But there's one wound that never healed. A story that wakes me in the middle of the night and burns like fire in my chest. I spent years of my life dreaming about the day I see my wife and son again. I clung to that hope like a man clings to a piece of wood in the middle of a shipwreck. It was the only thing that kept me alive. Every whipping, every cold night, every day without food. I'd close my eyes and think of them. I thought of her laughter, the smell of him when he was still a baby. That was all I had, all. But when the reunion finally came, the truth broke me in a way the chains never could. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. Because even though it hurts, this story needs to be told. Before everything fell apart, before the world collapsed on top of me, there was a time brief as it was when life gave me a little joy. It wasn't happiness the way white folks talk about it. The kind that lasts, the kind you can speak of without shame. But it was a small light in the middle of the darkness. And that light had two names. The woman who walked beside me and the son she gave me. I didn't choose her, and she didn't choose me. We found each other inside the chains, thrown into the same yard like animals. But her eyes, they were different. In the middle of fear and filth, there was softness. When she spoke to me, my soul remembered it was still human. Her name was Ayana. She had a soft laugh, skin dark as a moonless night, and strong hands, callous like mine. We couldn't touch in front of the overseers, but sometimes, when no one was looking, our hands would brush for just a second, and that was enough to give meaning to the whole day. For a time, we managed to sleep in the same corner of the hut, wrapped in rags, sharing what little warmth we had. There was no future for us. We both knew that. Even so, she looked at me like she believed love could live even in hell. And it did. For a while, it did. Our son was born on a cold night. She cried softly, bit down on a piece of wood so no one would hear. And I was there, on my knees, shaking more than she was. When I heard his first cry, something inside me lit up. I can't explain it. It was like the chain inside my chest had loosened just a little. We named him Malik. He was a tiny thing, big bright eyes, hungry for everything. Even in that cruel world, he smiled like he didn't know where he had been born, like he believed life could still be good. And we fed that dream of his. We worked all day, but at night, when we came back to the hut, he would be there with his arms wide open. Ayana would rock him gently, singing an old song, one she said her grandmother taught her back in Africa. I just sat and watched. That was my home, not the hut, not the fields, the two of them. For a time, things stayed like that, harsh, yes, but together, every little moment was gold. The smell of her skin after a bucket bath, the way Malik laughed when I made a face, the way she squeezed my hand when an overseer passed nearby. That was our resistance. Our love was hidden, whispered, made of stolen fragments of time, but it was real, and it was all we had. I knew deep down it wouldn't last. In those days, all it took was one order from the master for everything to change. A new debt, a whim, a bit of business, whatever it was. That's all it took. Even so, I tried not to think about it. Every time Malik said Papa, I wanted to believe I'd lived long enough to see him grow, to teach him how to fish, how to run free, even if only behind the huts. I wanted to show him what it meant to be a man, even in a world trying to tear that away from us. Ayana and I had promised we'd never run away with him. Not with a baby that small. It would have been suicide. So we swore to survive. For each other, and for him, and for a while, that was enough. Until the day two different men arrived, dressed like rich folks. They walked like they owned everything. They pointed at the slaves, asked for names, ages, strength when they looked. At Ayana, I felt ice run down my spine. They talked with the overseer, nodded, laughed. That night, Ayana held my hand tighter than ever. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. We already knew. In the days that followed, the smiles disappeared. Even Malik stopped laughing. It was like he knew something bad was coming. And it did. But that part isn't now. Not yet. I still need you to understand who we were before the nightmare. Because people think we only suffered, only cried, only feared. But no, even in chains, we loved, we dreamed, we smiled at the smallest things. And that's why it hurt so much when everything was ripped away. Because there was something beautiful there to lose, something pure, even in the mud. And that's what kept me going for so long, the memory of that time. That never came back. I still remember the sound of the chains rattling that morning. It was different. The air felt heavy, like the sky itself was warning me. The sun hadn't even climbed fully over the trees. When we were ordered to line up, that usually meant one of two things, punishment or sale. My hands went cold. Ayana was holding Malik, who had just started to doze off against her chest. He was almost 2 years old then, still small, but stronger every day. He had just learned how to say mama clear enough for her to cry when she heard it. I stepped closer to them as we stood in the line, as close as I dared. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last time I'd see them together. The trader was tall, white, wearing a gray coat and gloves to clean for the kind of filth he carried in his soul. He walked up and down the line, pointing, whispering, measuring people with his eyes like they were cattle. When he stopped in front of Ayana, I felt my stomach twist. He tilted his head and looked at Malik, said something to the overseer. Then they laughed. I remember Ayana's eyes locking on mine, not wide with fear, not yet, but tense, bracing. He didn't choose me. He didn't even glance at me. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. I knew what that meant. Ayana was told to step forward. She hesitated. The man barked the order again. She obeyed, clutching Malik tighter. I tried to move too, but a whip snapped in front of me and I froze. My feet wanted to run. My body burned to grab them. Hold on, scream. But one wrong step meant death. And I had nothing, no rights, no voice, no power. All I could do was watch. They walked her to the cart. Malik started crying. Sensing something was wrong, Ayana tried to calm him, singing softly, the same lullaby from the nights we spent together. I could hear it shaky, broken, but still there. A goodbye in the form of a song. The trader said something about the boy, too small to be worth much now, but promising. They took him from her arms. That scream her scream made echoed inside me like thunder. The way she clawed at them, the way she begged in a voice no one cared to hear. Malik was crying too, reaching for her, little hands stretching out. I tried to move again, and again the whip came, this time on my back. I still carry the scar. Ayana fought like a mother robbed of her soul. They held her down, shoved her onto the cart. Malik was handed off to another man. They were taking him somewhere else. Not with her, not even sewed together, just scattered, like ashes. I saw her face just once more before the cart rolled away. Her eyes found mine. I couldn't breathe. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. That silence screamed more than any words ever could. And then she was gone. I fell to my knees. They beat me for that, said I was wasting time, being dramatic, said she'd be replaced, just another woman, just another child. But they weren't. They were mine, my family, my breath, my reason, torn from me like weeds from a field. I didn't eat for days after that, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Malik reaching out and Ayana screaming. Every morning I woke hoping it was a nightmare. It never was. I asked where they had taken her. No one answered. The overseers laughed. Some said she was sent south, others said west. One said she died in the cart. Another claimed she was fine, sold to a good house. I clung to that one. That small lie. I needed something, anything to keep me from falling apart. I told myself Malik was still with her, even though I knew he wasn't. I told myself she was singing to him, holding him, that he was safe in her arms. Even if I had seen the truth with my own eyes, I had to tell myself another version, because the truth was unbearable. For months, I watched every cart that passed through, every wagon that entered the gates. I searched for her face in every woman's. I listened for his voice in every child's cry. I talked to the others in secret, asked if anyone had heard about a woman named Ayana with a little boy named Malik. Nothing. The silence around their names was like a tomb, and the more time passed, the more it felt like they were fading, like maybe they had never been real, just dreams born from suffering. But I remembered every detail, her touch, his giggle, the way he held my finger when he fell asleep. I began to fear I'd forget the sound of their voices. That terrified me more than anything. Not death, not pain, but forgetting. So I repeated their names every night like a prayer. Ayana, Malik, Ayana, Malik, over and over. Even when the others told me to stop. Even when I was punished for speaking out of turn, I couldn't let go, because if I did, then what was left? They say we weren't allowed to love, that we didn't form real families, that we were just labor, tools, numbers. But they lie. I loved them more than I ever loved myself. I would have died for them 1,000 times, and the day they were taken from me, a part of me did die. The rest just kept breathing out of habit. The days that came after they took Ayana and Malik from me were not days at all. They were something else, something hollow and stretched. Like time itself had stopped caring if I lived or died. I woke up each morning because my body still knew. How? Not because I had a reason. I worked because they told me to. I ate because my stomach hurt. But inside, there was nothing, just silence, no voice, no hope, nothing. People passed by me. Some whispered, some tried to comfort me, others told me to forget. Don't lose yourself, they said. It's done now. But I wasn't listening, not really. I couldn't. My mind was still with them somewhere on the road, somewhere in another field, somewhere I'd never reach. I kept thinking maybe they were still close, that maybe one day I'd see her again, passing by in a wagon, or hear Malik crying in the distance. Every time I heard a child's voice, my heart stopped. Every time I saw a woman walking with a bundle in her arms, I held my breath. And every time, it wasn't them, which was every time I felt myself sink deeper into that emptiness. At night, I stopped sleeping. I would lie on my side, facing the wall, whispering their names over and over. Ayana, Malik, Ayana, Malik. Like if I said it enough, it would bring them back. Like their names were candles in the dark, and I just had to keep them lit. I started seeing them in my dreams, but not happy, not safe. In my dreams, Ayana was reaching for me, screaming with no sound. Malik was crying, arms out, and I was always too far away, no matter how fast I ran. I could never reach them. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, chest tight, teeth clenched. It wasn't rest, it was torment. I remember one night, I walked outside the cabin and looked at the stars. I hadn't done that in a long time. I thought maybe they were looking at the same sky, that maybe we could still be connected through the night. I said their names out loud, quiet enough that no one could hear. Just me, in the dark. Ayana, Malik, I'm still here. That was all I could offer myself. Still here, still waiting. The other men started avoiding me, said I was cursed, said I was going mad. Maybe I was. I didn't care. I didn't want to laugh or talk or share food. What was there to laugh about? What story could I tell that wouldn't start and end with their absence? Even when my body healed from the beating I got the day they were taken, my spirit never did. I was no longer a man in that place. I was a shell, a shadow. Sometimes I forgot the sound of her laugh. That scared me more than anything. It would come back to me in flashes, like a wind passing through leaves. And sometimes I could almost feel Malik's small fingers wrap around mine. But it was never real, just memory pretending to be touch. There was a boy that arrived months later, about Malik's age, curly hair, bright eyes. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe. I stared at him, heart pounding. But no, he didn't know me, didn't look at me twice. And when I said Malik's name near him, he didn't react. I turned away before anyone could see the tears in my eyes. That's how desperate I was looking for my son in every stranger's face. I stopped talking after that, only when forced, kept to myself. They called me crazy, broken. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't broken, I was grieving. There's a difference. They expect us to suffer and keep working, to lose everything and keep marching. But how do you keep marching with no feet? How do you breathe with no lungs? That's what it felt like. I had no air, no ground, no light. Just that hollow space where love used to be. And still, I worked. Still, I woke up because somewhere inside me, buried under all the pain, was that promise I made to survive, not for me, for them. Because maybe, just maybe, one day I'd find them. That was the rope I held onto, frayed, thin, invisible to others, but mine, my hope, my anchor. I started marking time by seasons. The rain came, and they were still gone. The leaves fell, and they were still gone. The frost returned, and they were still gone. I carved a mark into the wall each time a moon passed. It was my way of saying, I'm still waiting. I knew I was losing pieces of myself along the way, my laughter, my softness, my trust. But I kept their names safe. That was all I had. Ayana, Malik. I whispered them when the wind was strong, so the world would hear. I whispered them when it rained, so the sky would remember. I whispered them when the field was silent, so the earth would carry their story. I whispered them when no one else did, because I couldn't let them vanish, not completely. And even though no one brought me word, even though the silence around their names grew thicker with time, I refused to let them die in my heart. No, while I was still breathing, not while I still had a voice, not while I remembered. Here is the next topic -5, the promises I made to myself, written directly in English with exactly 5,500 characters, formatted as requested, single block, no paragraph breaks, natural spacing preserved, and reduced pauses, asterisk. I made promises to myself in the silence, in the dark corners of the night when no one else could hear. They were not spoken loud, they were not written down, but they were real, more real than the chains I wore. I promised I would not let the memory of Ayana and Malik fade. I promised I would not allow their names to die in my mouth. I promised I would carry their love like a torch through the longest, blackest tunnel. Even if I never saw the light at the end, those promises became my bones, my breath, my purpose. Without them, I would have let go. I would have stopped eating, stopped moving, stopped fighting. But every time my knees wanted to collapse, I remembered the fire in Ayana's eyes and the way Malik's tiny fingers curled around mine, and I rose again. Not because I was strong, not because I believed I would win, but because I had made a vow. They could take my freedom, my family, my skin, but they would not take that vow. I promised I would survive for them. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know if the world would ever allow me the chance, but I told myself again and again that I would keep breathing until the day I found them, or until death took me. And even if I never found them, I would keep their story alive. I would speak their names to the trees, to the dirt, to the wind. I would tell anyone who would listen. I would tell those who wouldn't. I would make sure the world knew they existed, that they mattered, that they were loved. I promised I would never call another woman by Ayana's name. I promised I would never rest my hand on another child's head and pretend they were Malik. I could not replace them. I would not try. They were not symbols. They were not illusions. They were real. They were mine, and I belonged to them. I also promised that I would not die inside, not fully, even when the pain was unbearable, even when I wanted to lie down and let the world move on without me. I would fight to keep one small spark burning, a flicker. That was all I needed, one tiny ember in the ruins of my soul. That spark would be them, their laughter, their faces, their voices. I promised to protect that flame. Even when the storms came, even when the world laughed in my face, I whispered these promises to myself while working the fields, hands raw and bleeding. I whispered them when I washed my skin in cold water after a long day of labor. I whispered them in the moments between sleep and waking, when my heart was most exposed. I promised I would not be what they wanted me to be, not just a tool, not just a number. I would remain a father, a husband, a man, even if only in my heart. That was my rebellion. That was my dignity. I knew they thought they had broken me. That when they tore my family away, I would crumble and forget. That I would become what they needed me to be, silent, empty, obedient. But I made them a different kind of promise, a promise they'd never hear, but one that burned hotter than any whip they could raise. I would remember, I would wait, I would endure, and one day if God allowed it, I would escape. That was the hardest promise, not because I didn't want it, but because it felt impossible. Every route I imagined ended in death. Every whispered plan among us failed before it began. But still, I promised myself, if there ever came a day when the wind shifted, when the door cracked open, I would take it. I would run. I would risk everything to look for them, to find their names carved somewhere, to find a face that resembled Malik's, to find a song that sounded like Ayana's lullaby, even if all I found was a grave. I would kneel before it and say, I kept my word. I promised I would not curse the sky, though some nights I did. I promised I would not forget how to pray, though some nights I couldn't. I promised I would not stop dreaming, even when the dreams turned to nightmares. Those promises were not perfect. I failed them sometimes. I doubted. I grew bitter. I fell into silence. But each time I returned, each time I repeated the vow. I carved it into my soul like scripture. Survive, remember, search, love over and over. Like breath, there were days when I spoke only in my head, afraid my voice would crack if I opened my mouth. There were nights when I buried my face in my hands, pressing down to keep from screaming. But I did not break. I bent, I bled, but I did not break. The promises held me together. I lived through beatings, through hunger, through sickness. I saw friends die. I saw new ones brought in and others taken away. But I stayed. I watched the seasons change. I felt the weight of years piling up on my shoulders. My hair turned gray. My skin dried out. But inside, the spark still burned. That ember of a man who once held his son in his arms and felt the warmth of a woman who loved him. I made those promises to myself not because I thought they'd be easy, but because I had nothing else. And now, looking back, I realized those promises saved me. They became my reason, my purpose, my soul's anchor in a world that tried to tear me from every shore. Asterisk, let me know when you're ready. 4. The moment I realized I had to escape wasn't sudden. It was like a slow burn, a whisper growing louder inside my chest every day. The pain of losing Ayana and Malik was still fresh, but it no longer held me prisoner. It became a fuel of fire I could use to burn the chains, not just in my hands, but in my soul. I watched and learned. I listened to the guards' routines. I noticed when the doors stayed unlocked, when the night was darker, when the winds masked the sounds. Every small detail was a thread I could pull. I knew running wouldn't be easy. I knew the risk was death, but I also knew that staying meant living a slow death of the heart. One night, when the moon was hidden behind clouds and the camp was silent except for the occasional snore, I made my move. My heart pounded like a drum in my ears, every step echoing the fear and hope tangled inside me. I slipped through the shadows, avoiding the patrols, holding my breath when the dog barked. Close. I moved like a ghost, desperate and determined. The forest welcomed me like an old friend, its darkness both frightening and protective. The cold branches scraped my skin, but I barely noticed. I was free, but not yet safe. I had no plan other than to run far and disappear. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to go. Every night, I stopped to rest, eyes scanning for signs, ears tuned to every sound. Hunger gnawed at me, thirst burned my throat, but I kept walking. I thought of Ayana's laugh, of Malik's bright eyes. I told myself their spirits were guiding me. I would find them, or at least honor them by living. Days turned into weeks. I learned to read the stars, to find water, to avoid traps. I met others along the way, some escaped like me, others free-born, but wary of strangers. Sometimes we shared food or stories. Sometimes we hid in silence. Each step was a prayer, each breath a plea for strength. And in that wilderness, something unexpected grew inside me. Hope, not the fragile kind that shatters at the first storm, but a deep, stubborn hope rooted in love and memory. I imagined finding Ayana and Malik, holding them again, telling them how I never stopped looking. I imagined freedom not just for me, but for all those still bound by chains. That hope was my light. It was what kept me moving when my body screamed to stop. I'm still searching. I don't know if I'll find them. I don't know if they're alive or gone. But I do know this. I will not stop. I carry their names like a shield. I carry their memory like a flame. And I carry this story with me because it must be told. You listening now, if you feel the weight of this story, if it stirs something inside you, please, before you go, subscribe and join me in this journey. Your presence here means the world. And if you want to share your thoughts or your own stories, leave a comment below. Maybe someone else needs to hear what you have to say. And if this story touches you, share it quietly, so the memories of those who suffered won't be forgotten. Together, we keep their voices alive. The journey isn't over yet, and the next chapter is coming. Stay with me. There's more to tell. Even after escaping the chains, the shadows of my past never left me. Freedom was not a place, but a constant battle inside my mind. The memories of Ayana and Malik clung to me like a heavy fog, refusing to lift. Every step I took toward a new life was haunted by their absence. I saw their faces in every shadow, heard their voices in the wind, felt their touch in the cold night air. The pain of their loss was a wound that refused to heal. I carried it with me like a second skin, invisible, but always there, at times. The loneliness pressed so hard against my chest that I thought I would break. The world beyond the plantation was vast and indifferent, filled with strangers who saw me as less than human. I walked through towns where people looked at me with suspicion or fear, where I was reminded again and again that freedom was fragile and precarious. But I refused to be swallowed by despair. I held on to the promises I made under the stars, to vow to find my family, or at least keep their memory alive. I searched for news, for whispers, for any trace that might lead me back to them. I spoke with travelers, listened to stories around campfires, followed trails of rumors and hope. Sometimes I found others who had lost their families too, whose stories echoed mine. We shared grief in silence and strength in solidarity. Together, we formed a fragile community of survivors, bound by pain and resilience. But even among allies, I felt the sharp sting of isolation. The scars of slavery ran deep, cutting into the very soul. Trust was a fragile thing, often broken before it was formed. Every day was a test of endurance against hunger, against cold, against the prejudice that followed me like a shadow. I learned to be cautious, to speak little, to watch carefully. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the night was still, I allowed myself to dream again. Dream of a reunion, of laughter and warmth, of a life unbroken by chains. Those dreams were my refuge, my secret garden where Ayana and Malik still lived, untouched by pain. I wrote their names in the dirt with a stick, whispered them to the stars, promised that one day the world would know their story. But the past was never far. It came in sudden waves, memories that stabbed like knives, nightmares that dragged me back into darkness. Sometimes, the weight of all I had lost threatened to drown me. I questioned my strength, my faith, my purpose, but each time, I found a reason to stand, to keep moving, to keep hoping. Because even in the deepest shadows, there is light, and that light is the memory of those we love, the promise of freedom, the fire of resilience. I carry Ayana and Malik with me in every breath, in every step, in every heartbeat. Their love is the thread that weaves my story together, and so I continue walking this path not alone, but with their spirits guiding me. The journey is long, and the road is uncertain, but I hold fast to hope. To those who listen now, I ask you to remember, the stories of those lost are not forgotten. They live in us, in our fight for justice, in our call for freedom. If this story moves you, if it touches your heart, please subscribe and stay with me. Share your thoughts below, and if you can, share this story quietly so the voices of the past may be heard again. Together, we honor those who came before and give strength to those who walk after us. The next chapter awaits, and together we will uncover more truths. Stay close. There is still much to tell. Even in the darkest moments, when the weight of loss and loneliness pressed down on me like a mountain, I found an unexpected light, someone who became a beacon in the long night of my exile. It was months after my escape, when the world beyond the plantation had swallowed me whole, and I wandered through unfamiliar lands, hungry for hope and connection. One cold morning, near a small village where strangers often turned away, from a runaway slave like me, I met a man unlike any I had seen. He was tall, with weathered skin marked by years of hard living, and eyes that held kindness instead of suspicion or contempt. He spoke softly but with certainty, asking my name, listening to my story without judgment or haste. At first, I kept my guard up, hardened by years of betrayal and loss. I had learned to trust no one, for trust was a dangerous thing in those times, but his presence was steady, like the earth beneath my feet, a quiet strength that made me lower my defenses. Over time, he shared knowledge that had been passed down through secret networks, hidden paths to freedom, carved by those who came before, safe havens where the hunted could rest without fear, and signs in nature to guide a traveler's way. He taught me how to read the language of the forest better, to know when the wind carried danger, when the earth was soft enough for footprints to hide, and when the sky promised shelter or storm. More importantly, he reminded me that I was not alone in this fight. For the first time since losing Ayana and Malik, I felt a faint hope rekindling deep in my chest, not just a hope to survive, but a hope to live, to find meaning beyond pain and loss. This man asked nothing but respect and truth in return. In exchange, he gave me guidance, protection, and the wisdom that freedom was more than a place, it was a state of mind and heart. I began to see the road not just as a path away from bondage, but as a journey to reclaim myself and the memory of my family. We traveled together for months, sharing stories in silent moments beneath the stars. I told him about Ayana's laughter, warm and bright, and Malik's sparkling eyes full of wonder. He listened with patience, carrying my pain alongside his own without interruption. Though the burden I bore was still heavy, and the scars of my past often felt like chains around my heart, with his help, I learned to carry them differently, not as shackles, but as symbols of what I was fighting for. The dangers remained: hunters prowling, cold nights biting, hunger gnawing at my insides, but the fear was tempered by the knowledge that I had someone watching my back. He was more than an ally. He was a brother in the struggle for dignity and freedom. I never learned his full name, nor where he came from, and one morning he vanished as quietly as he appeared, leaving behind a small carved wooden figure. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, light can come from unexpected places. That figure I carry still, a talisman of hope, resilience, and friendship born from pain. My journey continues. I search still for Ayana and Malik, dream still of reunion, and carry their names as a sacred flame lighting my way. But I also carry the lessons of kindness, courage, and trust that this man gave me. Lessons that remind me we are never truly alone, even when the night seems endless. To those who listen now, I urge you to hold tightly to hope, even when it seems lost or fragile. If this story touches you, if it moves something deep inside, please subscribe and stay with me on this path. Share your voice in the comments below. And if you can, pass this story gently forward so the memories of those who suffered will never fade into silence. The road ahead holds more stories, more truths waiting to be uncovered. Stay close. The next chapter is coming. The weight of silence pressed heavily on me as the years passed. After fleeing the plantation and wandering through unfamiliar and often hostile lands, I found myself surrounded not only by physical dangers, but by an overwhelming quiet that seemed to consume everything inside me. Freedom, I quickly learned, was not a triumphant moment of joy, but a shadowed path where every step was haunted by memories I could neither escape nor fully share. The loss of Ayana and Malik settled deep in my bones, a silence louder than any cry or scream. In the stillness of the night, I heard the faint echoes of their voices, felt the hollow absence of their touch like a wound open to the world, raw and bleeding. The people I met along the way often looked away, unwilling or unable to hear the stories I carried in my heart. To speak aloud was to risk pain, to relive what I wish I could bury forever. So I learned to carry my grief in silence, to let the world believe I was broken beyond repair, a man defeated and emptied, but inside, the silence was a storm. Raging fiercely against the calm surface, I forced myself to show others. I thought often of the days when Ayana's smile had lit up, even the darkest moments, when Malik's laughter chased away the creeping despair like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Those memories were my only refuge, a fragile shelter against the cruelty of reality. But even they became difficult to hold onto as time passed, and my wounds deepened. Sometimes I questioned if my own voice would ever return, or if the pain had stolen it forever, leaving only an echo of a man who once dreamed of reunion and love. Along the way, I met others like me, survivors of chains and loss, who shared my burden of silence. We communicated not with many words, but in glances, in brief touches, in stories whispered in the safety of night around flickering fires. Together, we found a fragile strength in the quiet, a bond forged not from grand speeches, but from deep, unspoken understanding. Yet the silence also isolated me. It kept me distant from those who might have helped, from friendships that might have eased the unbearable load. I feared my story was too heavy, too dark to share, so I walked alone, carrying the weight of memories no one could see, a ghost haunted by the past. But silence is not always peace. It can become a prison, locking away hope, healing, and connection. One day, after too many nights spent wrestling with the silence, I realized that to honor Ayana and Malik, I had to break this curse, to speak their names aloud, to share my story with the world, was the only way to keep them alive beyond my own heart. It was an act of defiance against the erasure that slavery tried to impose on our lives and histories. I began to speak, slowly, at first, in whispers to trusted ears, then with more courage to larger gatherings. I told the truth of what was lost, what was endured, what was survived. Each telling chipped away at the silence, freed a piece of my soul that had been trapped too long. It was terrifying and healing all at once, a painful but necessary reclaiming of my voice and my dignity. Through the sharing, I found others who listened and understood, who became a chorus of support and compassion, lifting the stories of the forgotten and the silenced. To those who hear my words now, I ask you to listen not just with your ears, but with your heart, to remember the voices that were silenced and to speak up for those who cannot. If this story moves you, please subscribe and walk with me on this journey of remembrance and hope. Share your thoughts below and pass this story on quietly, so the silence of the past becomes a song of resilience and strength. The next chapter is near. There is still more to reveal. Stay close. There is much more to tell. The weight of silence pressed heavily on me as the years passed. After fleeing the plantation and wandering through unfamiliar and often hostile lands, I found myself surrounded not only by physical dangers, but by an overwhelming quiet that seemed to consume everything inside me. Freedom, I quickly learned, was not a triumphant moment of joy, but a shadowed path where every step was haunted by memories I could neither escape nor fully share. The loss of Ayana and Malik settled deep in my bones, a silence louder than any cry or scream. In the stillness of the night, I heard the faint echoes of their voices, felt the hollow absence of their touch like a wound open to the world, raw and bleeding. The people I met along the way often looked away, unwilling or unable to hear the stories I carried in my heart. To speak aloud was to risk pain, to relive what I wished I could bury forever. So I learned to carry my grief in silence, to let the world believe I was broken beyond repair, a man defeated and emptied, but inside, The silence was a storm, raging fiercely against the calm surface I forced myself to show others. I thought often of the days when Ayana's smile had lit up, even the darkest moments, when Malik's laughter chased away the creeping despair like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Those memories were my only refuge, a fragile shelter against the cruelty of reality. But even they became difficult to hold onto as time passed and my wounds deepened. Sometimes I questioned if my own voice would ever return, or if the pain had stolen it forever, leaving only an echo of a man who once dreamed of reunion and love. Along the way, I met others like me, survivors of chains and loss, who shared my burden of silence. We communicated not with many words, but in glances, in brief touches, in stories whispered in the safety of night around flickering fires. Together, we found a fragile strength in the quiet, a bond forged not from grand speeches, but from deep, unspoken understanding. Yet the silence also isolated me. It kept me distant from those who might have helped, from friendships that might have eased the unbearable load. I feared my story was too heavy, too dark to share, so I walked alone, carrying the weight of memories no one could see, a ghost haunted by the past. But silence is not always peace. It can become a prison, locking away hope, healing, and connection. One day, after too many nights spent wrestling with the silence, I realized that to honor Ayana and Malik, I had to break this curse. To speak their names aloud, to share my story with the world, was the only way to keep them alive beyond my own heart. It was an act of defiance against the erasure that slavery tried to impose on our lives and histories. I began to speak slowly, at first in whispers to trusted ears, then with more courage to larger gatherings. I told the truth of what was lost, what was endured, what was survived. Each telling chipped away at the silence, freed a piece of my soul that had been trapped too long. It was terrifying and healing all at once, a painful but necessary reclaiming of my voice and my dignity. Through the sharing, I found others who listened and understood, who became a chorus of support and compassion, lifting the stories of the forgotten and the silence. To those who hear my words now, I ask you to listen not just with your ears, but with your heart. Please, if this story moves you, take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below. Share your thoughts about the importance of preserving these memories and keeping alive the voices of those who suffered. Every word helps honor their legacy and ensures they are never forgotten. And if you want to continue this journey with me, I invite you to watch more stories from this channel, especially the videos in the playlist dedicated to these memories. The link to the full playlist is in the description and in the comments below. These stories are not just history, they are the voices of resilience, courage, and hope. Stay with us, because the journey continues, and there is still so much more to tell.